Well, oh God, it's still as bright as it was this morning, except for the panel, who are much, much brighter than anyone who was here this morning. I'm certain of that. Anyway, my name is Steve Hewlett. Good afternoon. Welcome to the BBC, the new Super Indie. It says question mark here, which I suppose is the point. Just a few weeks ago, the Director General showed his hand. Tony Hall declared the start of a competition revolution. Competition is good for the BBC, and I want more of it, he said. The BBC's new creative efficiency mantra would be compete or compare, and only do the latter where you can't do the former. And for BBC production, what we're here to discuss, he said that means two things. First, in-house quotas, or at least most of them, would be dropped, which for many people at in-house production, or IHP, as it's known in the jargon, or FIHP, as some commissioners have been heard to refer to it, was a bit of an oh dear moment. On the other hand, he also said that BBC productions should be freed from the grip of the BBC's commissioners and channel controllers and be allowed out into the market to compete and supply other broadcasters at home and abroad. Hence our question, is BBC production about to become a new super indie? Good question, did I hear you say? Well, and please, let's try and liven this up a bit. Think of it as a game show. So rounds of applause, please, when we get there. Well, to discuss it, we have PACT, the trade body for UK independent TV production. PACT initially supported the BBC's new plan, but as you here in this room in Edinburgh will be the first anywhere to see this afternoon, it now wants it to go much further. Please welcome the Chief Executive of PACT, John McVeigh. Super Indie All 3 Media is a major supplier to the BBC, but it's just been bought by Discovery and Liberty Global. And that is one of the reasons Tony Hall said his hand had been forced in terms of announcing the end of in-house and indie quotas. Please welcome the Chief Operating Officer of All 3 Media, Jane Turton. As Creative Director of BBC in-house production, he led 2,500 staff, making a range of programmes from EastEnders to Top Gear. Even before he left the job earlier this year, he knew things would soon have to change at BBC Production, or so he said. Now, out in the market himself, please welcome Pat Young. And top of the bill, so to speak, the man who has the job of making it all happen. Please welcome Director of BBC Television, Danny Cohen. Now then, but to get us started, I just want you to cast your minds back to a bygone age. One where not all the Daleks were on the screen. No, more important than Doctor Who, some of them were actually running the show. Remember Producer Choice, where for the first time, in-house BBC resources had to compete for business with outside independent camera crews, graphic artists, editors and facilities. It was genuinely radical stuff. Cue Davros, or the Exterminator, as he was fondly known. In terms of the context, why did it work and in what ways?
Well, the BBC was a command economy. Everything was directly funded. But what Producer Choice did was to essentially give all the money to the channel controllers, stop direct funding of overheads, of resources of BBC production departments, give the power to the channel controllers who were free to commission.
So the money followed the commission?
The money followed the commission.
And then what happened to the producer then? Well, it's called Producer Choice.
If you were a BBC producer, you were free either to use internal resources or to go outside. You controlled your own budget because you'd been given your budget by the channel controller, and you had to make that money go as far as it could. I have to say, it was an exceptionally difficult thing to do. It was introducing, so to speak, capitalism to Eastern Europe. But very quickly, BBC producers, as you would expect of some of the most creative people in the land, started to use their budgets very imaginatively. Guess what? They used fewer resources when they had to pay for them. We shall never know how many people worked at the BBC at that period. We tried to find out, but it was impossible. The best estimates would be that over 30,000 people worked for the BBC at the beginning of the process. And by the end, it was more like 20,000. I think the civil servants could tell the politicians that the BBC really was being effectively managed, that the money was well spent, but frankly, also, the howls of pain that emerged from the BBC also persuaded the politicians that these were not just empty words on the BBC's part, but something had really happened.
And what effect did it have on the political dialogue?
We would never have got the increase in the licence fee that we got at the beginning of 2000, which was the best licence fee settlement in the BBC's history, an RPI plus settlement that really saw the BBC develop very, very strongly over the following 10 years.
You moved on to what you might call phase two. So you separated broadcasting and production. What was the idea behind that? And if you'd stayed, where would it have got to?
I would have been very happy for the process to continue whereby more and more production came from the independent sector, save only for one issue, that I also believed in centres of excellence. I would be nervous of a pure market where there were no centres of excellence, no natural history unit, where over decades the best scientists, the best technicians, the best program makers have come together and developed very highly original and innovative techniques for making natural history programs which are better than anybody else's in the world. I'm not close enough to it any longer to know whether you can let the market rip in an area like that, or whether it would be prudent to maintain those centres of excellence. They're the questions on my mind, but they're no longer informed questions.
What do you think the perception is of the BBC today?
Well, I think the BBC, not for the first time in its history, has been challenged by recent events, and the BBC always has to return to this issue. Can we prove that we're spending the licence fee efficiently and prudently in the licence fee payer's interest? It's going to have to do it again.
That was, for anyone who doesn't know, and I sincerely hope, for the sake of the TV industry and the festival, that there are lots of people who don't remember who that was in the room. But that was John Burt, was director on the BBC for quite a long time, and the pioneer of so-called producer choice. Danny Cohen, if I can start with you. John Burt is essentially saying there that the BBC needs what you might call a kind of compelling efficiency narrative to deal with upcoming charter, licence fee, and so on. Is that really what this move is about?
No. This is us sitting down together and working through, looking at the industry, seeing the rapidity of change, massive change in our industry in the last few years, looking at the strength of the independent sector, looking at making sure we're as efficient as possible and offer value for money, and also making sure that we don't do anything that disrupts the possibility of making sure the best ideas get to viewers.
But it is about demonstrating efficiency, though, at some point.
The main thing is about making sure we get the best ideas to viewers. That's what we are there to do. Now, we also need to be efficient. I don't think it's just about showing we're efficient. We need to be efficient because we need to be responsible with public money. So the more we show we're efficient, we're doing our jobs better. I also believe that doing this, as I said, is making sure we get the best ideas to the audience wherever they come from. And just to clarify on that, what we're saying is the in-house guarantee of 50% goes. Everything, the whole market, in my bit of the BBC, not news and so on, is open to the competition so that whoever comes up with the best idea gets the work.
So remove all the quotas, in effect, other than the 25% legal quota for qualifying independence, which someone will have to change the law to do that.
Well, we're going to have a look at all of that. We're going to have a look at all of that. We need to set up a working group now. We need to work closely with the industry, with all our industry stakeholders, and work out what the next phase of that is, both in terms of how we set up BBC production and how it works with the SRS.
But your ambition is to, I'll come to saying, your ambition is to drop the quotas.
Yeah, okay. and we want to, and the quid pro quo of that is that the BBC can compete fully in the market and can make programmes both for other broadcasters and suppliers both in the UK and abroad.
Well, for clarity, we're going to try and separate these into sort of two bits. Let's deal with the quotas and the supply, as it were,
sure.
the demand side first. Do you envisage there being exceptions? In other words, John Burt there talked about, particular centres of excellence which open market, simply open market could end up disrupting.
I think there are certain areas like sport and children's where, and those aren't bits the BBC I'm responsible for, where we want to take a harder look at that. I think in the case of areas like natural history, I think they are world-class programme makers. I think they'll continue to win huge amounts of business in an open compete market because they are as good as it gets around the world. And you can see that by the fact that, the BBC pays about 20% of the budget for the natural history programmes because 80% comes from the market. It's that good.
So you think they'd compete anyway?
I do. I think there are some particular things around the markets in children's and sport that we want to look at, and we'll want to do that as part of the next stage.
Okay. Will you consider putting out to tender major pieces of BBC output? For example, I don't mean the IP now, but I mean the production, for example, of EastEnders.
We're not proposing to do that, and I'll tell you why. I think when that happened about 15, 20 years ago, the market was very, very different. The BBC is not now the biggest gorilla in the market. This business at the moment has a turnover of 400 million. There are far bigger players, US and others, in the market. If we want to put MasterChef and The Apprentice and some of the other shows up for tender for the BBC to bid for, let's have a look at that. But given that we are not the biggest in the market, and there's not a huge issue there with market disruption given the massive consolidated global studios, we don't feel we need to do that in order to be fair.
Okay, 2 points then. First of all, if you don't, in effect, a quota will remain. Secondly, well, except in terms... Hold on 1 second. In terms of compete or compare, you could put EastEnders open. You could open the production of EastEnders up for competition.
Well, it's not a quota.
So why wouldn't you?
It's not a quota. It's up to... well, in a way, why should we? Yeah. I mean,
Well, Tony Hall said compete or compare.
Yeah.
You could put it out to competition.
Please let me answer, Steve. If we are going to do that, let's compete and compare for the IP owned by some of the consolidated global studios as well. If these programmes are commissioned on their quality, when they stop being good enough, then fine, something else will come in and replace them. But in a world in which we're not the biggest beast in the market, there's no reason why the BBC can't carry on making programmes it makes very well.
Can I also just pick up this compare point? When I ran in-house production, we actually had an NAO audit of continuing drama, which found that there was no problem in terms of the efficiency of BBC in-house continuing drama, but the NAO could not audit the indie continuing dramas, which are made for the BBC.
Yeah, look, I'm not. So don't get me wrong.
There's an underlying assumption that in-house is less efficient.
There's not. I'm not arguing. I'm not sitting here trying to argue that in-house is less efficient. I'm taking Tony Hall at his word, which is that if we can't, we'll only compare if we can't compete. And
but EastEnders competes every day.
All I'm pointing out is that the production of EastEnders is something which could be put out to competition.
But that's a financial comparison. But EastEnders competes creatively every single day. And if commissioners choose to continue commissioning it, then it carries on. The financial comparison is meaningless.
Just saying.
Yeah,
okay.
Just saying. Just saying back.
Okay, so
it's a dialogue.
So, Danny.
It's a nice line.
How much do you imagine this whole thing could save licence payers?
We haven't put a number on it. We haven't done it like that because the first thing we do is we want to open up to the best ideas. The other point worth making is about the WOC. And the other big reason...
Is there a planning assumption
Steve,
on cost?
Please let me finish my answers.
I just want to get an answer to the question, really.
Well, let me finish and then you can ask me another question. The WOC is the other bit of it that's broken, and you asked the other reason why we're doing it. At the moment, we don't feel that there's enough room for either smaller indies or BBC production or indies in general to compete in that. So we want to open up. That's the reason we're doing it. We believe we can save a lot of money overall because we can make BBC production even more efficient by doing this, and we believe do that. But we're now going to start this work, and we'll make a business plan on that basis.
But just to be clear, at the moment, there is no planning or working assumption on how much this could save licence payers?
We are doing very, very detailed business planning. The thing about these things with the BBC is if you try and do all of that work in secret, someone finds out and it leaks because too many people know. What you have to do now at the BBC is, this is our proposals, we're now going to work with the industry and work as do it. So if you're asking me today to say, have I got the answers? I haven't, but we've announced our direction of travel and now we want to work both internally with the industry to get all those details done.
Have you got any general sense of the rough quantum, you might say? Not the detailed figures, I accept that.
Yeah, we think there's millions to be saved by this route because we're going to have to become ever more efficient. But we will also be subject to the market, and there'll be other areas where actually we're proved to be more efficient than the market in some areas of our programme making. So there'll be good and bad in that, but we will save more money. But we're not just doing it to save money. You know, you're very focused on the money. The principal reason I want to do it, the principal reason is I believe in open competition and I want the best ideas on behalf of licensing players to reach the screen. And I think this is the best way of doing that.
Just one more question, and then we'll open it up. As you heard that, before John Burt left, he separated broadcasting and commissioning on one side and production on the other because of the sort of inherent potential conflict of interest between the two. Now, you currently have responsibility for both broadcasting and commissioning and production.
Yeah.
at some point, if the level playing field for all comers is to be established, that's going to put you in a conflicted position, isn't it? Do you expect that at some point that division will have to be reproduced?
Yeah, I do. I think if we go ahead with this, I couldn't do both. My job would have to change, and I wouldn't be able to do both. So absolutely, yes. There would be a conflict of interest there, and the role would have to change.
Jane Turton, you've been at ITV. I remember you were at Granada. I think you were elsewhere in the ITV system as well. So you've been through this kind of process in some respects once before. But what's your reaction to what Danny has said?
Well, I mean, it's good. It's good news. It's good news. We're only answering the first half of the question. We're not talking about the BBC competing against us.
We'll come to that in a second.
Exactly. So on the first half of the question, this is a very good thing for the independents, and I still consider us an independent. I think Danny's right. I mean, I think some of the interesting issues, of which there are, I mean, a lot of challenges, will be around how one segregates the roles and decision-making within the BBC. You look at ITV as a model, it actually, I think, works really quite well. It's always relied on some amounts of networking arrangements, various different codes of practices, etc. That will, I'm sure, now have to start to apply to the BBC. But as far as the indies are concerned in this country, it is really difficult to grow your business in the UK today. It just is. That is part of the reason why we have all chased foreign overseas format deals, overseas sales, etc. And a lot of our growth over the last 2 to 3 years, I mean, John can talk you through the stats from a sectoral perspective, have come from outside the UK. So anything that increases the opportunity in the UK is good.
Do you see the point, partly, that when Tony Hall made the speech, and Danny's referred to it, that one of the problems with the WOC, and forget people don't know the window of creative competition, so the structure was 25% qualifying indies, 50% in-house, 25% window of creative competition, in other words, which anybody could be in.
Yeah.
What some of your, now that you've just been bought by people who are broadcasters, your indies are no longer qualifying.
Yeah.
So you've suddenly filled, I mean, I was thinking, somebody was telling me about, is it Lion TV was one of your companies, program Homes Under the Hammer. It alone has just kiboshed the WOC.
Yeah, I mean, it's run out of capacity, hasn't it, the WOC, which, as Danny said earlier, is obviously a catalyst for this change. But as he also said, and I'm sure this is true, it isn't the only thing that has motivated a change, which I think is about the BBC changing in line with market, in line with consolidation, in line, I guess, ultimately with customer demand.
Do you think that you are more efficient than the BBC in production?
It's really difficult to answer that. I mean, we think we are very efficient. We have profit as a motivator in our world, which makes life easier in many respects, because you've got something that's very visible, very tangible, and you can compare and contrast, can't you? I mean, profit is helpful. We're very commercial, we're very profit-oriented. So I can compare our P&L, our gross margin, whatever it is, to our competitors. It's much more difficult for me to sit here today, I think, and it's probably much more difficult for them, actually, to look at us and make a comparison.
We'd like to do a benchmarking exercise on that, actually, and we've invited Pat to do that. I think that invitation is still open. We'd like to do that, because I think that'd be very helpful.
Would you
be open for that?
Yeah, totally, because actually I think that is a very good starting point. I mean, their cost base is different, our cost base is different. You know, there will be all sorts of stuff that one will have to look at in considerable detail. How they attribute cost, I imagine, is a complete, sort of fest of questions. I mean, it will be difficult, but we should do it.
Pat, do you think the BBC realistically had an option not to do this?
No, I think the BBC had to make this move. I wrote before that I actually had a conversation with Mark Thompson back in 2011 suggesting exactly this same move, because with the then production board studying what was happening in the marketplace and also the challenges we were finding attracting talent, a lot of key talent that we tried to attract basically said, we don't want to work in a system where we only have one buyer, and that one buyer basically determines our entire creative future.
And you were feeling the pressure of that?
We felt the talent pressure back in 2011. And George let me have the conversation with Mark Thompson as a part of our annual performance review. And Tomo said two things. First of all, it's not up for grabs, it's in the charter, so you've got to wait till 2016. And secondly, he thought there would be an issue in that the public think that they pay the BBC for programmes. Most of the public don't know that a large, 40% of the programmes are made by independent producers. And so the public think they are paying the BBC for their content, and then the BBC start making content for other people. There'll be a public perception issue around the licence fee that he didn't really want to get into. And so for that reason, he just said,
together.
park it.
How do you think in-house production will deal with no quotas?
At the moment, they will deal with it very differently because in-house production isn't a monolith. If you look at comedy and drama, they are 75% freelance anyway. They're quite market-facing because they're in a constant battle for talent, whether that's writers or performers or actors. That's very different to, say, religion, which does songs of praise and it does a few documentaries and it has a single buyer and actually it's the only main buyer in the whole of the marketplace. So I think culturally the different bits will respond differently, and they're in this bind at the moment because Tony's made it very clear that he's only prepared to give up the quota if BBC Production can pitch elsewhere. And until he gets that guarantee, he's not tearing up the quota, which means it's quite hard for the leadership work to start within production about what this new business might look like, because Tony hasn't got the quid pro quo guarantee that it's going to be a genuine 11-player field.
I might be worth stopping on this point if we may, because I've read the speech a couple of times. It says here, on the question of BBC production going into the marketplace, we're up for a discussion as to whether they should offer ideas to other UK broadcasters, but the world should definitely be their market. Now that sounds to me like...
he says, because we talked about this yesterday, so we both got the same. I'm just going to go back a paragraph. If indie producers can take their ideas to any broadcaster around the world, I would want the same for the BBC. There was a discussion about the UK, but definitely the rest of the world. And in return for removing those protections, we would remove our own. So he's not removing his first.
So Danny, are these two things inextricably linked?
In my mind, yes.
So you can't possibly have one without the other?
In my mind, yes. I mean, I think the other thing, just to add to Pat's point, there is the point about the quid pro. We can't change it in this charter period anyway. So Tony's right to say, and Pat's right to say, we need to go through the work, but we can't do it in this period. It needs to be part of those discussions. And I think Pat's also right to say it's gone down differently in different areas. In some parts of the BBC, I'm not the most popular person at the moment. In other parts, they're really excited about the potential of growing their business and making things for other channels around the world. So you're always going to get that in a business in a mixed economy like the BBC.
Okay, we'll come back to some of these things, I'm sure. So now, PACT initially welcomed Tony Hall's plan, but they have a new report out now, today, which delegates you are the first to hear about. So, John McVeigh, briefly if you can, what does your report say and how does it relate to all of this?
There's a couple of comments I'd like to come back on, but never mind. We've published a report. In fact, it's published right now. It's free on the PACT website. It's a 102-page report. It's been produced for us by Oliver and Obam Associates. And basically, because we weren't able to get access to the detailed cost information, we did ask the BBC, but us, like many others, haven't been able to do that. We've actually approached this in a different way, which is if the BBC were to be publisher-broadcaster, and that programming spend came out to the market, whether that was to a BBC production entity, All3Media, or anyone else, what is the benefit to our overall ecology? And what sort of margin does that create? So the report looks very much at what's called net present value, and Mark Oliver's here from Oliver and Obam, if any of you economists want to go into this. But we estimate that on an annual basis over the next 10-year charter, it generates a gross profit, if you want, from that spend, which creates a value in the market of about £65 million a year, a large part of which goes directly to benefit the BBC programme budget, which is good news for BBC Production or any other producer working for the BBC. So we think that's good news for the licence fee payers. That's their money working harder and actually getting another sort of return on that money being made available to the broader market. We think that's good for the industry because some of that money will go to independent producers who will create IP, formatted IP, and historically, British independent producers have been far better at exploiting formats around the globe than the BBC. And that generates another value in the overall market. So that's good for our overall economy and our exports. And we also think it's good for the BBC. It reduces the programming costs by £35 million a year. But even more important than that, if we can go to the next slide, please. It allows the BBC to focus on its core purpose, which is really what the licence fee payers care about, is by commissioning great stuff. not necessarily making great stuff, but by getting them great stuff for the license fee. Now, there's a number of ways you can go there. There's the classic BBC out of London approach, which we've called lift and shift. Basically, you take BBC production and you give it to BBC Worldwide. That's a £500 million business you give to Worldwide. That's one model that no doubt will be entertained. Our report actually says that's not necessarily the best way to achieve these benefits. There's a number of nuanced ways you can approach this. Some strands you could basically put out to market straight away, and many of you in these rooms or many people in New Broadcasting House might leave and set up a company to go and deliver them. Some of them could be contracted out, pre-existing IP, long-running soaps could be put out to tender, and some could be moved to Worldwide and be a subsidiary of Worldwide to help to drive what Worldwide should be focusing on, which is its B2C global business. And that's good for all of us, Indies and the BBC and license fee payer. But at the heart of this, and it goes to the sort of caveats that have come out in the speech, Tony Hall's speech about, well, we'll get rid of the in-house guarantee if we're allowed to do that. Well, of course, that raises a number of questions for us and the rest of the market, which is if you've got a new super BBC production indie in the market with explicit or implicit guarantees and subsidies coming from the BBC, then that's not exactly a level playing field.
Okay, we'll come to that. Before, just let me, simply if you can, do you have, in financial terms, have you any idea what effect this would have on licence payers stroke the BBC?
Yeah,
if the BBC became a publisher broadcaster, which is what you're suggesting, yes?
Yeah, it generates a net value over the period of the licence of about £900 million.
How do you know that if you've already acknowledged you don't know what our numbers are?
We've had to...
quite a weird...
Well, we've had to model efficiencies and costs based on what we know from the rest of the market because we can't get access to the BBC.
So the report says you don't know what our numbers are, but you've got certain figures on what you're saying.
Because this is like everyone else who's asked the BBC this over the many years, you can't get access to the real data.
But then how do you know your data's correct? How do you know your response is correct?
Well, I'm very happy for you to tell us the real data, Danny.
I mean, can I come back on this?
Would everyone else like to see what BBC actually costs per hour?
All right, John, but
if,
just take your, if your figures are correct.
I'm not saying that, I don't think saying they're not correct is fair. I think they're a modelling based on a lot of hard work.
I understand that, but we're talking about, was it 575 million over a 10-year period?
That's the gross profit of the spend out of the market.
So 50 million a year.
Yep.
I don't mean to be weird about this, but that is a rounding error in a budget of 3.6 billion. Is it why cause this much disruption for that small benefit?
Because you drive a number of other values. I've tried to. I mean, the report will go into more detail. I don't think we've got time to do that today. It drives a number of benefits across the overall ecology. Releases Worldwide to be a better distributor. It gives more choice to the
Why is it released worldwide? How?
Because they'll focus more on actually investing in the things which will get them a real return rather than necessarily putting funding into content that may not actually be driving a return for them.
Public service.
Oh, is that what you think they do now?
That is very hard to tell because you can't get the numbers.
Can I just ask a big philosophical question?
Yes.
At a time when Sky buy Love, so they have an in-house production capacity, when Channel 4 are investing in indie so they get greater access to IP, when Discovery are buying, frankly, everything that moves that isn't nailed down, why should the BBC, alone in the world, be the only broadcaster that can't generate its own IP through production?
Can I add something to that before the answer?
Well, you would. You said they should be out of production.
Matt.
Well, no, what we're saying is this is a report which is, we said we would make the case for why a publisher broadcaster would be a good model.
Yeah, but I've just asked you the question, why in this moment, when everybody else is going into production, should the BBC move out of production?
Because it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily follow that the best interests of the licence fee payer are in the BBC having production. The best interests of the licence fee payer, we've done some consumer research on this, which we'll be publishing, and it's pretty clear the licence fee payers don't care who makes the programmes.
Okay, Danny.
I mean, I must admit, I mean, we've got a good relationship. I thought that the independent sector would be really thrilled, and some people are, that we've opened up to full competition. I know it's something that you've been asking for many years. We're delivering that. What seems to be happening now is that what I'm saying is, here's the pie of production. Whoever can come up with the best ideas, let's openly compete, and whoever comes up with the best work, you win. What Pat seems to be saying here is, actually, we'll have the whole pie, thanks. We don't, let me finish this time. But we don't want to compete. We want to be anti-competitive. We want to be anti-creative. We want to say we want the whole lot. And I do think that's quite disappointing, because I think, as Pat said, at this time, when actually everyone's going to production, IP is important, British IP is important, there is no reason why, in a world of super indies and consolidated global studios, the BBC cannot have a portion of the market.
Okay.
One final thing on that, the BBC makes some of the best programmes in the world. They do make some of the best programmes, so do indies. Why should the BBC, as one of the world's great acknowledged programme makers, be told they have to stop?
Okay.
It's
John.
absolutely perverse.
John, briefly if you can.
Right, well, our thesis, which came out from conversations with the Trust over many years on the walk, as we saw the market, however you're defining the market basically competing further and further and further and higher against in-house production. And one of the dilemmas you have is, what do you get at 48% when one of your commissioners wants to commission a big show from someone in this room, and it's going to be 4% more out of the walk, which tips it into 52% external supply. Would you or would you not commission the show?
But that's
that was
why
where we
we're
started
opening
from.
it up.
Yeah, you're opening it up, and what we're saying is, if you open it up to true competition, then there are a number of ways to arrive at that.
But is it true competition?
You
if we're
are,
not allowed
you,
to
no, no,
compete?
yeah, no, but fine. What you're saying is, we will compete. We want to compete in the market, but by the way, we want all these other guarantees. So you still want the
What
quota.
other guarantees?
Well, you want EastEnders. You want.
No, it's not a guarantee. It's called a
Make the shows
commission.
we make.
It's called a commission.
Can we have
Why not
rights
put
to
them
an
out-
apprentice?
Why not put them out to
Okay,
the
just
market?
hold on. Sorry, Jane. What is your reaction to this?
I've read it. I think it's provocative is the point, isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of this is about establishing the case where you've got on one hand, currently, the regime that you are suggesting you change. In the middle, I guess you've got the abandoning of the minimum guarantee. And then at the furthest extreme on this spectrum, you've got John's proposal here, which is you go the whole hog and go to publisher broadcaster.
Do you think we should be a publisher broadcaster?
We are not scared of competition, and I think we're happy, as all three, to rely on our strengths as a programme maker to be commissioned more than we have been historically by you. You aren't actually a huge buyer of all three content, as it happens. We're a much bigger supplier to other broadcasters than we are to the BBC. That's one thing we'd like to fix very much.
Sure.
So you getting rid of your minimum guarantee is helpful for us. I'd like you, by the way, to put some of your programmes out to tender as well. But I'm not necessarily suggesting, as all three, that we need to go this far.
Okay.
But I do think we should welcome the report, because actually in a funny sort of way, what the report's doing is starting to poke at some of the underlying economics of the model in a way that, albeit absent full understanding of the empirical data, is useful.
Just one
It's
question.
properly useful, this
Why
report.
do you just? I mean, why do you think that Discovery, who owns it, who are a far bigger company than the BBC, need to be offered out to tender BBC work? What is it about Discovery's position that means that they need to do EastEnders and those other programmes, despite the fact that you're a bigger player in the market and not British owned?
Well, I don't see it like that as it happens, and I'm bound to say this. We have been promised, and we believe them, that we will continue to be run as an independent.
But it's
does
American.
anybody-
No, we're working. We've got
Hold on.
American.
We're going to go to the audience.
Literally, just one
We're
second.
going to go to the audience in one
Well,
second.
second, but in this
This
debate
is chaos.
about economics, can I just? EastEnders is made by creatives.
Yeah.
No one's talking about. The reason that
Yeah.
EastEnders works is there are a team of creatives who make it.
and that's the
Yeah,
answer
so
to
we
Danny's
can
question,
make it.
because
We could make it.
all the people
I mean,
that-
to be honest, the
Well,
same
you just
people
think
would be
that all
making
those
it.
creatives will come and work.
hang on,
for you.
no. It might be owned by Discovery, but it's still British talent that's in there.
Yeah,
That's the point.
the
Just
Discovery.
let me ask you, John. Quid pro quo. If EastEnders were to be put out to tender, how would you feel about Who Do You Think You Are, long-running drama series, programmes made by your members, also periodically being put out to tender?
Well, they are up for competition every time they're getting commissioned, because Danny and his
Same as EastEnders.
team decide who.
Exactly the same.
No, but in the current guarantee, you have all the largest, longest-running series, which takes up the vast bulk of the quota. And the big problem you've had is, as the market has supplied not only short-running series but returners, that your opportunity to get more creativity in your schedule to get more suppliers has diminished.
That's
because
simply not true. If
you're
you look
getting
at
squeezed by.
That's simply not true. If
Can I
you look
just-
at entertainment, 90% of entertainment strands are returners,
Can I
and
just,
most
can I
of them are from
just ask you
indies.
to just pause?
No, but that's
for, just pause for 1 second. You can carry on in one moment, because we're about to do something novel here. Okay. So, audience, now no one's told me how you're doing this, but I understand that you can vote. I have absolutely no idea how, because no one told me, but perhaps you know. So here's a question, and you can answer
Use
yes
your
or no.
hands.
Okay, no, there's some jiggery.
Could we vote?
You use the app. Oh, sorry, you use the app. Have you all got the app? Oh, good, yeah. Okay, right. So the question is, should the BBC get out of production? That's pretty simple, yes or no, and it will take a little while for anything resembling an answer to appear. So, Pat, you were in the middle of saying something about entertainment.
No, I mean, 90% of the entertainment strands are returners, and most of them are made by indies. The idea that the in-house guarantee is clogged up with returners, but indies don't also clog up the system
You
with
never let me
returners.
finish. It was basically both parts. It's what we were saying about the dilemma between the in-house guarantee and the market. Right now, the capacity for BBC commissioners to take a punt on someone here with a fantastic new idea is constrained, and that's not necessarily a good thing. That's not necessarily a good thing for the licence fee payer.
You seem to think the guarantee involved me walking in to the control of BBC One and saying, here are the 10 programmes I'm going to make, give me the cheque, off we go. It doesn't work like that. Every year you have a conversation, not just every year, every month you have a conversation about how's this title doing, are we going to renew it, do you think Holby's running out of steam? These are called commissions.
I'm one of the few people who hasn't worked in a broadcaster. You've worked in the BBC. I've had a variety of anecdotes about how it actually works.
Well, I've worked at the BBC and Channel 4 and Discovery.
But let's just try and simplify it a minute. Supposing we took the question of, let's say, The Voice, right, owned by a separate company, so on and so on and so on, licensed to the BBC, etc., etc., etc. If anyone were to suggest that production contract, leave the IP where it is, that production contract should be put out to tender with all comers invited to apply, not to take the IP, that belongs to whoever it belongs to. Similarly with EastEnders, leave the IP with the BBC, but put the production contract out to tender. This is all hypothetical, I realise. The first thing your members would say is, no way, it's our show. Why shouldn't they say, hang on a minute, EastEnders, it's our show?
I'll speak as all three, and John can answer as Pat, but in a weird sort of way, I would almost wonder whether you're coming at it the right way around. I would look at putting some of the long-running shows out to tender, because it's a reasonably straightforward win for the BBC. And I mean, the independent who then produces that show will take the delivery of that show as seriously as the BBC in-house production will. It will be the same people making it, frankly. It will be tupied across, and the programme will be produced under a different label.
People who are really proud to work for the BBC, who want to make those shows for the BBC.
They will make the shows for the BBC.
But as part of BBC...
Do they need to have BBC on their employment contract?
For some people, yeah, they're very proud of that.
Let's just say, so the result here is 2/3 of people think the BBC should not get out of production.
Actually.
3/4, yeah, forgive me. So, 23% yes, 77% no.
I think the point, I mean, just to repeat that point, sorry, Steve, I know that we're not the easiest.
We're going to run out of time.
Yeah, I think the point I'm saying is that we are opening up to full competition, and I think what Pat's proposing here is anti-competitive, because it's saying we can't all compete for the best ideas. We want to have we want to have everything ourselves.
It's slightly misreading, isn't it? Because PACT is not one thing. It's a whole load
of
and
I think you can see from that I don't think all of PACT's members think it's a great idea for the BBC to
let's test. Let's have a go at the second half of this equation. So Tony also said, as we've discussed, that BBC, I'm going to paraphrase here, let BBC production out into the market to compete. So, Danny, how might that work? Because at the moment, BBC production, obviously it's part of the BBC, it's licence fee supported in all sorts of ways. It was, some very senior people in the BBC said, when I said that's going to be tricky, isn't it? One of them said, not just tricky, illegal. Meaning, I think, sort of state subsidies and all this. Anyway, tell me how it might
work. Well, we're going to announce a team next week who are going to lead the business planning and the strategy and policy work, and we hope to announce that next week. I think the thing I'm acutely aware of is the degree of scrutiny. I mean, the BBC's under scrutiny about everything all the time in lots of good ways. The degree of scrutiny that we are going to be under to make sure that we don't fall foul of any state aid rules, any financial fair play rules, any fair trade rules, is going to be immense. And we have to make sure that we set it up in a way that means we don't fall foul of it. Part of that will be structural, so my job will essentially go in its current form as part of that, because you have to have it completely separate. There'll be lots and lots of ways in which we have to do that. But we know we need to get that right, because if we don't get that right, we will be rightly in very, very serious trouble.
So, again, I accept that the detail will be worked out by your team, and I know it's a complex process. Yeah. But in principle, this will establish BBC production as a separate entity.
Yes, it will, yeah.
Unconnected in other ways to the BBC. It will have a BBC name, would it?
Yes, it will. I mean, it will be part of the BBC family in the way that BBC Worldwide is, but it will have to have completely different books. It won't be able to be subsidised by the BBC in any way, and it will have to win commissions on merit. And as I say, Steve, I think you're right to ask those questions, and people will continue to ask those questions in the next 2 or 3 years and beyond if we do this, because we have to be able to show that we are transparent and we're not breaking those state aid rules.
Is having BBC production in that form, as a kind of standalone subsidiary, if you like,
Sure.
is that consistent with what always used to be said about it, that production is the beating heart of the BBC? It has to be more central than that, doesn't it? To be the beating heart?
I think that's a really fair question, and some of the people who within BBC Productions and the BBC are unhappy about this proposal feel that very strongly. They feel that there's a risk to the BBC's values. They feel, and I think these are understandable risks. They feel there's a risk to our public service credentials and so on. I think that goes down to how we set it up and making sure that it has the values that we want it to have, and is making programmes that, based on our centres of excellence and our specialism, are high-quality programmes that we're proud of. But they will have to compete for that work.
Just one other question, then I'll see what Pat and others have to say about it. If you're hypothetically making programmes for other broadcasters, as any independent producer will tell you, broadcasters don't always behave especially well with your content. They do all sorts of things with it which annoy you, where they are prone to breach undertakings you might have given to contributors. It's a difficult situation. And as a seller, you are the supplicant. Essentially, you have to put up with it. So, how is it going to sit with the BBC's name, which the programmes will obviously have because they're made by BBC Productions, being tinkered with by people over at Channel 5 or Channel X or Channel wherever it is who want to do their own thing with it? So there's potentially a sort of brand damaging potential in this.
So there's two things about that. I think it's another really good question. I think the first answer to that is that we have to accept that we'll be making programs for other channels and they're working independently of us, and we've got to allow them to get on with it. I think we have to make sure. I think most really, really good indies have a set of values that they work to and content they're proud of that they feel fits their corporate and company values, and they make programs in ways that fit that. And we're going to have to be particularly good at that, so that people know that it's a BBC show. We won't take any commission we can get. We want to make sure, as a lot of indies do, that they just things that fit with the things they believe in and their values. So we'll have to do that and make sure we stick to those values. But we will also have to accept that we're making things for other people, as ITV Studios do for the BBC. Kevin Ligo's just done something for us. That's not been down to Peter Fincham or anyone to meddle with. We've been working with Kevin and his team on that.
I wonder, you recall that the Trust intervened. Worldwide, we're busy trying to creating programmes in other parts of the world to supply BBC and other channels, stuff that never touched base in kind of UK, public service broadcasting, if you like, never touched base in London. And the Trust got quite windy about that because they could sense that the BBC's name might end up on programmes that no one here would ever have wanted to make, that the brand might be damaged in that way. How comfortable do you think? Do you have any indication, should I say, of how comfortable the Trust might be with the idea of BBC production out in the marketplace? I think we haven't talked to them in detail about it yet. I think we are going to have to reassure them that the guiding principles of this business will protect the BBC brand. And I think there are ways of doing that. And that's going to be about leadership and making sure we deliver on that. Okay. Pat, what do you reckon? Because you came up with an idea for doing this, didn't you?
I think the last point is a challenging point, but I also think the world is a different place to even 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when the Trust had that conversation about drama. The world is a different place, and I think the Trust recognised that we've got to do something different. Look, you could do what ITV do and just call their production, their factual business, Shiver, and then you take the BBC name off of its front of house. I mean, I wouldn't do that, because I think the BBC name's a great calling card. So it comes down to the values and making sure that you've got people running that business. I worked at Discovery, and the values are right through the company, and if you do something which is against the values, then you pay the penalty. And so, you need to run it as a strong, values-driven corporation.
Do you think? I mean, you've worked in it. You've run it. You know this organisation, the production business in the BBC really well. How easy or straightforward is it going to be to separate it effectively in terms that create the sort of transparency and level playing field that Danny's talking about?
If we didn't, there's a whole property strategy question, which, bizarrely, you're talking about creative and broadcasting, you end up talking about property. Right, they share buildings with people, and that's going to be an issue in terms of accounting. What's a fair economic rent that they should pay for the facilities that they use? If you look at New Broadcasting House, which is a building designed for news and current affairs, if you were to charge BBC Factual the cost per square footage of a building which has got triple redundancy and Newsnight studios, that's clearly not going to make any sense. But if you charge them a fair economic rent for the facilities they use, then I think there is a way of doing it. I mean, PQ in Scotland, we share that with Indies. Indies use the space in PQ. But what you're going to have to be able to do is demonstrate clearly that you are paying a fair market rent for the facilities that you use. Beyond that, I think the real questions are going to be what, comedy is obviously a unit, and drama, they've got Drama Wales, Drama Scotland, Drama North, Drama in London. Entertainment is already quite a small unit. Factual is a big unit and is well distributed, and Factual is probably the one.
Is it the case where Factual is where most of the people are?
Factual is where most of the people are. It's where most of the people on staff are. About 50% of people in Factual are on staff. And Factual is also the one which has the closest connections with local and regional programmes. So BBC Scotland staff will work for BBC Scotland and then maybe come through and spend time in the network area and go back again. That will take some working out.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you were sort of feeling the talent drain pressure, as people were saying, well, I'd rather work, I can't deal with being in a one-customer company.
Yeah.
And then one can see why that would be desperately frustrating. I mean, especially when you think of some of the big hits that have, you think of Millionaire or even Spooks. I think Spooks, Stephen Garrett and Kudos, I think Spooks went around 5 years worth of trying, and you sort of committed to ideas and wanted to make things happen. It's kind of very frustrating when there's one customer and they say no and it's game over. Yeah. Do you think that the BBC would start to see a reverse in that if it was able to engineer this?
I think the BBC would become more attractive to talent if we got this, if we managed to land this. I mean, look, there's a hell of a lot of work to do landing this, and it's going to involve Pact and the big indies and the small indies. But if you could pull it off, the BBC would become more attractive and would actually be back in the middle of the ecosystem rather than standing to one side. I mean, when you come to the BBC, you almost have to stand up to a particular set of things. Your expenses are going to be displayed, your salary is going to be made public, you're not going to get paid market rate, you're not going to get a bonus, and by the way, you can only pitch to one person. Well, that's not the most compelling employment offer that I've ever had to make to someone.
Jane, you're out there in the market yourselves. How do you regard the idea of the BBC arriving as a competitor in your market?
So I think we're not complacent, but nor are we scared about it. I mean, I think we think it's a good thing. It's healthy. The BBC has always actually been a very rich seam for us to plunder for good creatives. The indirect consequence of this may be, as Pat says, that is more difficult in the future. That will be slightly irritating. But competition in a market is something we welcome. We're not scared of the BBC. We're pretty respectful of the programs they produce. If you were looking at the BBC and looking at it as if you were going to buy a production company, and the test questions are always, aren't they, how good's the talent and how good are the program brands? I mean, they are phenomenal. They really are they have a phenomenal portfolio of programs and some pretty impressive people. So they've got they are surprisingly lacking in confidence about their own ability sometimes, I think, in terms of their position in the market. Having said that, we're not intimidated by competing against them. We compete day in, day out for every programme commission. It's very tough. We're used to it.
Are you confident that it would in fact be a level playing field?
No, not yet. Far from it. I mean, I think some of the things we've touched on now, the sort of 3 or 4 topics, there are far more things to consider. How are they going to show net revenue coming back to the P&L of these divisions? How exactly are they going to be incentivised to get the formats to work overseas? You've got huge jurisdictional issues. You've got all sorts of issues about pay and rations and culture and governance. And, it is true that if you are an independent producer, as you know, Steve, you are pretty pragmatic in a lot of the decisions you make. And pragmatic can sometimes mean that you are just having to go on risk in ways that I guess these guys at the BBC, it's going to make their hair curl when they see some of the stuff they're going to have to consider doing in the future. It is a very different world when you're
supplying. Give us an example.
Well, your budget's being cut. You're having to cut corners to get the ed spec delivered against the newly reduced budget, and you just have to take a view you're going to do it on that basis. So, or your fair dealing stuff, are you safe that that's proper to be fair dealt? You're taking commercial decisions day in, day out that are pretty tough. I can't imagine they are set up to do that today. They can't be. I mean, it's not the world they live in. Those entrepreneurial people who run the big independents are very different animals from the guys who have been sitting, even in ITV studios, actually, and I would think even more so in a BBC in-house production department.
John, what concerns do you have about this prospect?
Well, I think compete and compare, and what Danny said about how the competition will happen is clearly something we will be poring over in depth, and I echo Jane's points. But I mean, the real test of compete and compare will be if BBC Production is an entity in the market, will bits of it close down if they don't win business? Because if you're an indie, you go bust. That's the true test of competition. If you don't win commissions, you can't pay your staff, you can't cover, you go bust. I see a churn in the indie sector over 10 years, which is consistent. Low barrier to entry, low barrier to failure. If you don't win work, if you're not good enough to deliver, you go bust. That will be the real test, ultimately, of BBC Production. If there is anything in place which doesn't allow that to happen, then there is something going on, and that's the question I would have.
Danny?
Yes.
Yeah.
If we can't compete, those bits won't continue. I mean, like all of your businesses, if you've got a very, very large hundreds, if not billions of pounds business, you can cross-subsidise and bits of the business you believe in and want to keep going for a while. But if we can't keep things going, that is what we want: open, fair competition.
I think
if you
during my
can't,
period at the BBC, during my period
and
at
that's the risk we're taking, and that is a big risk on behalf of the BBC.
I just wonder, isn't there an inherent potential unfairness in that, though? I mean, if you compared to most indies, launching yourself into the market when you've got programme brands like EastEnders, right, and hundreds of millions of pounds worth of commissions, even if you lost a quarter, it's still 300 million.
Yeah, but
no, hang on. But your capacity to invest in development, your capacity to support things that to do what all businesses do, but your capacity to support bits that aren't working so well and take the longer view. Your capacity to do that would be massively in advance of anyone else's.
I won't apologise for that. I think what I'd say is that if you asked me that question 15 or 20 years ago, I think I'd agree with you. We're not the biggest beast in the market anymore. All three medium Discovery, Shine and Endemol, Warner Brothers, they're all bigger than the BBC now.
Hang on, just let him finish.
This is a mythology.
Just let him finish.
What, the Warner Brothers and Shine and
No.
But so that if we asked that question, we would have been the uncomfortably sized gorilla. We're not anymore, and I don't think it's unreasonable for the BBC to openly compete and try and do that.
In global terms, that might be true.
Yeah.
Even in UK terms, to some extent, that might be true. But in terms of the vast majority of independent producers in the UK, 2 people and a pet, etc., living hand to mouth, which is where most of them are. It's steamroller.
A huge amount of production is made by a smaller amount of conglomerates now. We know that. But one of the things we've said around terms of trade,
much bigger in the UK than any single indie.
In terms of the terms of trade, we think we do need to look at them again and make sure that some of the smaller indies, we need to look at that whole supply system and see if we've got it right. So yes, we are going to be big, but we won't be the biggest, and we think we can compete. And let's compete.
As regards getting rid of, I mean, when I ran production for 4 years, we probably lost 400, 500 people over time. We shut Birmingham. We shut a whole centre. So it's not that they're scared of taking hard decisions. Hard decisions do get taken.
When you were talking about this before, was there any reaction? Did Thompson venture a view as to what might happen the first time that BBC Production made a hit for ITV?
Yeah, he said you'd catch hell from the commissioners, but they'd probably get over it. But the thing is, if you look at Primeval, Broadchurch, they were developed by BBC in-house drama. And when they weren't taken, they went into turnaround and became big hits somewhere else. So we know we can make stuff for other channels. Other channels know that BBC people are, we often get criticised around creativity, but we're recognised for delivery. Does
it produce a potential brand problem, though? So when you see the initials BBC turn up on an ITV hit, it's not quite the same the other way around, because as you go back to your point, the point that Thompson, I think, made, which is that public licence payers think they pay the licence fee for the BBC. You see a programme turn up on Channel 4 or ITV with BBC on the end of it.
I think an area like natural history, where BBC is clearly market dominant, and then the natural history unit make a programme for Channel 4. If I was the controller of BBC One and BBC Two, I might be a bit fed up that now my market dominance is being eroded. But there again, we've seen Attenborough, the face of BBC Natural History, making programmes for Sky. Yeah. The talent are increasingly mobile between channels and networks. So I don't think that kills the idea.
So we've got another question for the audience, so get your apps ready. This one says, should BBC Production be allowed to make programmes for other UK broadcasters? You've heard the argument, you've heard the debate. Should BBC Production be allowed to make programmes for other UK broadcasters? And I'll try and use the right part of my varifocal glasses to read the numbers this time. So John, you were objecting to Danny's assertion that 20 years ago, the BBC would have been a huge player by comparison. Now it's simply not.
It's still the biggest production company outfit in the UK market. I mean, saying oh, it's this group and that group. You've got to bear in mind, the UK independent sector has a turnover now of about 3.1 billion, about 1.5, 1.6 is from domestic income, but 1.6, 1.7 is from international exploitation. So when you look at the group sizes, the BBC as a producer is still the biggest producer in the market.
But isn't that the point? It's a global market.
Yeah, no, but
So you make for all around the world.
You keep chucking all the global stuff in, and you're actually talking about the domestic size, right? All the super groups, as you call them, the super indies, combined account for about 22% of all network hours in the UK. So
it's quite a lot.
Yeah, but you're way more than that.
Yeah. But we're going to.
And you're way more than that.
But look at ITV Studios, who are the BBC's third biggest.
But this, can we
ITV
just deal
Studios.
in realities that in terms of spend on production in the UK, BBC production is the biggest producer in the UK.
So two
And you
things.
think we should stop producing?
So we'll come,
I think we should let
you'll
the
get another
market
chance.
compete for it. Yeah.
That's what we're saying, market compete.
So the result is that 81% of you think the BBC should be allowed to make programmes for other broadcasters, and only 19% think it shouldn't. If you can put the lights up, we could take some questions and contributions from the audience. If you want, do indicate there's someone there. Before you come on, can I just ask a question? If you wouldn't mind just putting your hands up. As a matter of interest, how many people here work for the BBC? Put your hand up if you work for the BBC.
Oh.
Well, that's interesting. It's nowhere near 71%, but there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you
It's
very
not
much.
far off
Sorry.
it, though.
Nowhere near it, Ron.
Got a question there, do tell us.
Oh, we're going to argue about quotas again.
Tara Conlan, Media Guardian. Can I ask Danny, after what you said about EastEnders, will Strictly and Top Gear also not be tendered out? And will the new entity have some kind of guarantee or restriction that it won't be sold off, like what happened to Resources and Technology? But if it does go, if the staff do go within BBC Worldwide, could that mean that they could end up back at TV Centre?
So we're not planning to put any of the current strands of programmes out to tender. That's our position, so that would include those as well. I think in terms of potential to be sold off, I don't think that's in our plans either, but I think we need to get through the next stage of our regulatory and financial planning to be able to come up with a conclusive answer on that one, Tara. And as to property, I think Pat rightly raised that. I think we're going to need to make sure that our productions are in places where they're efficiently run based on their budgets, and that may mean that factory production isn't in West One.
Okay.
Daniel Toole, I run IBM's media and entertainment business across Europe, but I used to be in this. I used to be in BBC corporate strategy under Bird, so and involved in some of these changes in different areas, some less successful, some more. So Dan, it's a big change for the BBC. If I remember rightly, there also used to be a time when we thought the BBC was there to stimulate the market in general, including talent leaving the BBC and going elsewhere. But if I could de-BBC-fy the question, in the global context, there is an existing business model which most other people are using of scale and distribution combined with production, which works very well. What's your view on that in the BBC context? And also, is there something beyond the business model in terms of how programmes are made? So the US model is long-run formats, for example.
All right, thank you. Before you answer, Danny, who else would like to ask a question? I can't see any hands. Do indicate. Chap down here. Anyone over here? Sorry, Danny, do go ahead. Apologies.
So, look, I think most people want to own IP. It would, as I say, I think one of the world's great programme makers having to stop making programmes sounds quite perverse to me. I think a strategy which combines distribution and production is the business strategy that almost everyone is going for. And if we want a strong BBC, we should allow the BBC to do that too.
Yeah, Mark Oliver, author of the Oliver Allbound report. Firstly, just to clarify what the report says. It doesn't say the BBC should get out production. It says it should be a mix of production going into worldwide or commercial subsidiary, some contracting out, some winding down, and some management buyouts. You should create new indies.
Yeah, I mean,
it's in your power to do that. Secondly, the numbers in the report are estimates. It's an outside-in report, often done by companies looking at other companies. It's very clear. You can look through them and you can do your own numbers. Third point, on the contracting out of current strands, if you're not going to do that, what becomes crucial is how you price those strands. Think about how Coronation Street is priced into ITV and how they divide the spoils of the most successful programme on ITV between production and broadcast. You will be doing that across 30 different strands. How those are priced, Antiques Roadshow, EastEnders, Holby, will become crucial. That will be an area of extreme scrutiny.
Okay.
Look, Mark, I think the report intends in the long term to neuter the BBC and its ability to make programmes. That's, I think, the long-term trend that it's working towards. I respect your view that you think the numbers are based on estimates. I still don't quite understand why, if you say there's a problem, we can't get your numbers, you can then come up with the numbers. Okay. But we'll probably have to agree to differ on that. As I say, I think we should have open competition. For the first time in its history, the BBC is offering to open up all of its production in television so that the best ideas get to the screen. I think that's a big, bold move for the BBC, and that should be enough. I don't think Indy should then be saying we'd like the whole lot.
Jane, we're going to have to come to a close, but in 10 years' time, where do you think this is going to be? Will the BBC still be making programmes?
Yes, but we will be making more than we are today for the BBC.
So that it'll be smaller?
Yeah, I believe we will compete successfully and win more shows, no doubt. And I also wouldn't be at all surprised if some of those big, long-running, chunky series don't eventually come out to the independent sector, because unlike my two, Pat ex-BBC, but Danny BBC, I weirdly think there's actually something to be said for doing that sooner rather than later. I think it's an easier win for them, and I think they remain just every bit as much in control of the commissioning of that content as they do, even if they produce it.
Pat, 10 years' time?
10 years' time, I think the BBC will be there. I think it will be strong. It will be strong globally, although it might be smaller in places in the UK. I think the biggest risk is the long-running strands, but for different reasons. I think the biggest risk is the long-running strands because a lot of them are quite old. And the challenge of continually refreshing those strands will at some point come to an end. And when you lose 50 weeks of Country File or whatever, not to pick Country File out, it's doing very well, but when you, because staff are very nervous.
Is it going?
Staff are very nervous. When you lose a big long-running strand like that, then replacing it is, commissioners will probably go for 5, 10-part things to start off with to try and find something that works, and then your business takes a big hit. So the big long-running strands are a potential risk to the business because a lot of them are not young.
John, 10 years' time?
10 years' time, I think that the vast bulk of programming for the BBC will be produced by external, and it won't necessarily be BBC production. I think the pressure on a fully independent commissioning system, which only cares about what the licence fee payer thinks, not about the infrastructure of the BBC, will drive it towards the best ideas regardless, and that the market will correct as it did through the walk.
Danny, last word.
I'm going to hope to work with teams inside and outside the BBC on the best possible ideas wherever they come from. I hope they'll come from big indies, small indies, and a really healthy BBC production. I think there's room for everyone. I think that's the point of compare and compete. I think the BBC, I hope, will thrive. I mean, one final very quick thing I'd say is, because we won't have many more chances to do this for that, the next 18 months for the BBC is the biggest moment for a generation. I'm grateful to Pat that they're going to say that the BBC should have a licence fee increase, a smaller BBC in terms of its overall licence fee as a smaller UK creative industry, and I'd love the whole industry to get behind the BBC in the next 18 months to make sure it's really strong.
Do you think this process is critical to Charter Review?
I think it's one of an important issue, and I think that we want to show we're as efficient as possible. We want the best ideas on the screen, and we're trying to do that with this very big move. But overall, please get behind the BBC in the next 18 months so that we've got a strong licence fee.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming and listening and participating, but most of all, thanks very much to the panel. Your appreciation, please.